These are some ideas I have about creating Thedas in Crusader Kings 2, maybe also Crusader Kings 3. I don't actually own the game, so I don't know how applicable my ideas are to that version of the game. I wouldn't call this exhaustive or comprehensive. If you do create this, please contact me so I can download and play the mod. If you make it in Crusader Kings 3, I'll tell you that I hate you, then buy Crusader Kings 3 so I can play it. I do not know how this could be done, but I have some ideas about which periods could be interesting, and some ideas on how to address some of the issues involved in the history of Thedas. I'm not sure why this mod doesn't already exist. Perhaps the Dragon Age fandom is not that big, or doesn't have that much overlap with the Crusader Kings fanbase, or perhaps the owners of Dragon Age are better at preventing people from using their property than others. Maybe it could be called Dragon Kings, or the Kings of Thedas, but the name isn't that important. I don't think that the world of Dragon Age is developed outside of the main map, though that shouldn't be an issue, as the base game's map doesn't include the entire world either. Elder Kings has specializations which you can acquire through societies. I'm not exactly sure how well Crusader Kings 2's classes line up with Dragon Age's, though they don't have to be acquired through societies. There could be an intrigue option to locate a manual or an instructor. A lot of games have extant great works. However, given that most of them were built at some point in the timeline, I'm not sure how well this could work. Perhaps they could exist at certain start points, though I don't know if that would be possible. For instance, the Winter Palace could be a great work which exists only after the founding of Orlais. There are also archaeological sites which exist in the Elder Kings mod, but would be an issue in the same way. The Temple of Durthamen might be a ruin in which you could study at the time of the games, but it was an active site of worship at the time of the ancient Elves. There should definitely be trade routes, particularly around the seas, but I'm also thinking ones extending through the heartland of northern and southern Thedas. I know in the main game there's a thing where the names of the provinces will change depending on who controls them. Aside from the Exalted Plains or Durthavarn, I don't know of any examples from the setting. It'd probably be a lot of work to figure out even one set of names for all the counties, which largely aren't named in the setting, plus all the higher realms, let alone multiple sets for the various groups which might come to control it. Also, there is the consideration of dividing the counties into duchies, kingdoms, and empires, which could also be different from culture to culture. As I understand this timeline, Thedas started out just being populated by dwarves. I don't know that there's much written about this time. I assume it would just be a smattering of kingdoms and tribes, perhaps with a nominal high king. I have difficulty seeing the dwarves as nomads, but perhaps they could be. I don't know much about the Titans, so I'm not sure how they could be worked into gameplay. Perhaps something like the Elder Kings, where the Titans operate like China does in the main game. I don't think the philosophy of the stone would exist at this point, though perhaps the dwarves could have a sort of worship of the Titans. I feel like they'd also have a unique culture to this time period. The elves at this point would, I think, have one culture and worship powerful mages as gods. Perhaps their culture could be Elvhenan. There would probably only be one religion but various denominations, like in some of the religions in the main game they have. The Evanuris could be handled by creating more chinas. The elves encountered the dwarves and proceeded to drive the dwarves underground. This is a good first starting point, the elven and dwarven leaders being featured rulers. The invasion itself could be simple, event-spawned armies. But how do you simulate the dwarves being driven underground? The taigas can be represented by holdings in various provinces which are functionally unassailable owing to high fortifications and giant garrisons, possibly using dwarf-specific improvements or great works. Or there could be small counties with a special terrain type, Subterranean, which highly boosts fortification. Maybe Subterranean could also enable certain improvements as well. There could be a rare trait for certain commanders, which offers a great boost against subterranean holdings, things to negate the terrain bonuses, or possibly restrict the trait to dwarves and darkspawn. This could also be combined with the China mechanic from the main game, Maybe the holdings could be deep roads entrances, with ties close to the surface being functionally unassailable, or like trade routes. Another potential, though perhaps ham-handed and inelegant solution, would be to make the deep roads an island and potentially inaccessible, which comes or can come under dwarven control after the elves start invading. I believe there is a similar thing with Iceland in the main game, or an area locked entirely or mostly to indicate deep roads entrances beyond a mountain range. The tags would likely be regular feudal or tribal holdings, though it occurs to me there could be other sections which are nomad territory. I'm not sure what the dwarves could have for special improvements and units. I suspect it'd be too soon for them to have lyrium to make their explosives, though perhaps they could have alchemists who throw that kind of bomb. Additionally, you might be able to add lyrium to the game, perhaps as an intrigue action, which temporarily increases learning or mana. I don't know if the ancient elves' ability to travel through the Fade, the Crossroads, the Via Dirthara, or the Illuvians could be worked into the game. The Valaslin could be a trait and have an effect on the portrait of the rebelling slave leaders. Arcane Warriors, or Dirthena Salin, are supposed to date from the ancient elves. I don't know if it's possible to make specializations only available after certain times, but there could well be multiple versions of this trait depending on the character's culture. The period of the Elven Empire could just be a bunch of kingdoms, perhaps even just Arlathan, and the environs as a feudal state, with the rest being tribes or nomads. I'm thinking that the Elven nobility of this time could have a special new culture called Arlathanian, while the common folk have Elvhenan culture. This could perhaps represent the decadence of the rulers of the time and provide reasons for revolts. For the dwarves, I think this would be the start of a new culture and the start of the philosophy of the stone. I'm not sure what this culture would be called. I feel like the 12 Kingdoms period is a good name for the era. Perhaps there could be a deep roads culture shared by all its denizens, or the dwarves could have separate but similar cultures based around each taig, though the lack of information about them might make this difficult to differentiate. And this could be another starting point. Nugs apparently come from underground. Perhaps they could be incorporated in some way, perhaps as pets, or have subterranean improvements featuring them. I'm not sure what the ancient dwarves would have in terms of special improvements or units. They are later known for sturdy construction, heavy infantry, crossbows, and lyrium explosives. I don't know if they ever had mages. Perhaps they could have alchemist grenadiers instead for their special troops. There may also be an intrigue option to gain the assistance of a dwarven architect. If the dwarven kingdoms operate like China in the main game, that could be a boon. An option could be added to the Find a Smith intrigue action, whereby you could contract a dwarven smith. At some point, the veil is created. This is tied to the murder of Mythal. The murder of Mythal could be a boon for those who worship the Evanuris other than Mythal and Solas, though I'm not sure if it's possible to make the boon of Solas banishing the other Evanuris only available after Mythal is murdered. I'm also not sure what effect this could or should have. This would cut off all the Evanuris. I don't know if there's a way to stop access to specific Chinas, or deactivate them, or make it such that you can't get anything from them. I know the elves were supposed to be immortal before that, but that they'd sometimes decide to lie down for a long sleep. That part could be represented by a change in the flavor text for dying of old age, before the character just decided to go to a long sleep and afterwards they actually die. Maybe magic would become more expensive afterwards and mages rarer, or they may actually come into existence afterwards, and before that anyone could work magic via an intrigue menu. Mage, along with the rarer Dreamer, could be a trait, potentially with cultural or religious specializations and associated spells, and the dwarves can't have them. Court Mage could be a position in some cultures or levels of government. And Elves, Tvinter, Grey Wardens could have them at any level, the rest probably just King or Emperor level. Dwarves couldn't have them, or maybe only rarely if they invite a mage to their court. The acceptability of magic might have to be culturally and religiously linked, or require the creation of religious denominations which allow for greater mage freedom. The free marches for Eldin and Tiva, Orlais, and Cunandar seem very restrictive. Navarra, the Anderfels, Ravane less so. Tevinter is the least restrictive. I'm not sure if there's a way to work enchanting into the game. Perhaps as an intrigue option, like finding a smith, perhaps replacing artifacts with better ones or supplying runes, or it could be an addition to the find smith narrative, allowing you at certain points to contract a dwarven or tranquil enchanter to produce a better or different class of artifact. Perhaps it could also be a skill trait you could acquire and maybe a court position. There could also be a number of new events, like encounters with spirits and demons, potentially leading to one becoming an abomination. Being an abomination could be a special trait, with special negative social and legal effects if discovered depending on the culture. The trading spirit of the Avar could be a notable exception, along with the risk of the spirit or demon taking over. This could be played like the lunatic trait, or possibly make the character unplayable. Perhaps it could be a rare event in which a spirit might offer to possess you, for instance if you're about to die in battle, a duel, or an assassination attempt. As an aside, I don't like the way the game handles assassination attempts. It's always a little too obvious what's about to happen. The event text is always the same. There are a number of social events whose text could be used, like having someone invite you to dinner or go out hunting, and sometimes it's just that, and sometimes you end up poisoned or having to defend yourself from an assassin. Anyway, Terrace in the Veil would become a thing, perhaps a status effect on a province with negative effects. Removing that could involve paying mages or just hoping it goes away on its own. Then there's the invasion of the humans. I remember this also being mentioned as when the elves began to die sooner, with their lifespans shortening to be about equal to the humans. I don't know if there's a way to change that. The weakening of the elven realms could be simulated by the introduction of a plague, with the invasion being event-spawned armies. The humans may have come from Saharan and formed 4 kingdoms: Qunari, Tevinter, Neuromenian, and Barindur. This could give 2 separate starting points, one with the initial invasion and one after the 4 kingdoms are setting up, where the goal could be to unite the 4 kingdoms. They could have separate cultures, or the same ancient Tevinter culture, and some religion which predates the old gods, perhaps an animistic or spirit worship, or perhaps just already worship the old gods. I recall there being something about there being pyramids in the jungles of Saharan. These could be great works. For the height of the Tevinter Imperium, I think northern Thedas would be the heartlands, while my impression was that southern Thedas was less settled, perhaps having tribal or even nomadic holdings. It would have slave revolts instead of peasant revolts, though I don't think this would differ in more than just flavor text. Revolts could be either, with the character determining the race, his culture, and religion of the revolt leader. It could be connected to having a particular culture. The magisterium could be a society which characters can join. According to legend, the first blood mage dates from this time, so if specializations can be restricted by time, this could be the start of that. This trait could selectively affect people's opinions negatively and be an imprisonable offense. In ancient Tevinter, it might just have been acceptable, perhaps in combination with old god's faith. In modern Tevinter, it seems to be an excuse to get rid of someone who's fallen out politically. Under mainstream Andrastianism, I think being a blood mage is an execute on sight offense, though nomadic Dalish and Grey Wardens may use it, though I suspect they prefer if you just use your own blood and only to defend the Dalish or kill Darkspawn respectively. As I understand, the Mortalitazi used to reanimate corpses as a way of binding spirits. Perhaps this could create an undead courtier or help in plot defense. Binding spirits could be another thing which blood mages could do, though I know little about how this works in the setting. Blood magic was also apparently used to destroy Arlathan. Perhaps this could be a boon from one of the old gods, but I'm not sure what effect it would have in the game. Religiously, I think the Imperium would not be much different from the Elves. Flavor text would be a polytheistic religion, perhaps with people devoted to particular gods, and those gods being represented by various chinas. This period of Tevinter hegemony could be another starting point. The Alamari, who include the Clane, Avar, and the Chastened, in what would become Ferelden, were apparently animistic, worshipping various nature deities. They would likely have had their own cultures and religions. The Avar could have an augur as a court position in place of the court mage. They apparently came up from the south. Their migration could be rolled into the height of the Tevinter Imperium in the start point. I remember something about the dwarves fighting a war against the scaly ones, though I don't know that there's much in the way of detail about that. They could be event-spawned troops in whatever culture and religion the creator of the mod decides. At some point the Darkspawn arise, which could be another starting point. This could be something like the creation of the Veil, where the old gods have a boon you can gain from whichever god the character worships. The boon could be called something like, visit the Golden City. How exactly they take the deep roads would depend on how it's simulated in the game. The island might be the easiest, as you just spawn massive armies, while the two tags which survive are made functionally unassailable, possibly with dwarf-specific improvements or great works. If the dwarves just have unassailable holdings on the mainland, most would have to be somehow destroyed or transferred to the Darkspawn. If transferred, that could be the source of the occasional Darkspawn raiding party which hit the surface. If the Deep Roads replace China, there'd need to be some way to destroy or deactivate it, or limit its power if the Darkspawn take over. Then the Darkspawn raiding parties could just be event-spawned armies like rebels. Orzammar should be functionally unassailable no matter what. The Darkspawn might be organized as a theocracy to make them unplayable, or nomads given their propensity to just destroy everything. I'm not sure what their culture or religion would be, or what specific improvements they would have. I suspect that Broodmother, or possibly species-specific ones, could be something they could build. The Blights could actually function something like the creation of the Veil, or the Magisters entering the Golden City. The Darkspawn could, in exchange for sufficient favor, gain the boon of starting a Blight. I don't know how often NPCs in the game actually take such boons, or if this would lead to a broken game if the player is allowed to play the Darkspawn. The first Blight would be relatively simple, with just event spawn a large number of Darkspawn. This should, I think, start in the Deep Roads before breaking onto the surface, though I don't know if there's a way to make sure that the Darkspawn devastate the Deep Roads before moving onto the surface. Also, I don't know if the brief period of golems being created would or should be included. I don't know if there's a mechanic for requiring Grey Wardens for killing archdemons. The extant mechanic whereby you capture a rebel leader would work well enough, though if it could be made to end the invasion only when the leader is executed, or perhaps only allow the invasion to end when the Grey Wardens are founded, would be truer to the setting. The Grey Wardens could be set up as a religious order or a theocracy, though I'm not sure how you could set them as only fighting the Darkspawn. I suggest this as they appear to occasionally be given holdings like Soldier's Peak or the Arling of Amaranthine, similar to the religious orders in regular CK2. They would definitely be based in the Underfells. Their Griffin Riders could be special troops, though given as they use mages too, I'm not sure how that'd manifest. The Griffin Riders could be tied to an old culture the Underfells had and is slowly replaced by the modern ones, which uses mages instead of Griffin Riders. I don't think tying Griffins to the combination of old gods' religions and Anders cultures would work, as Grey Wardens converted after the Second Blight and the Griffins didn't go extinct until the Fourth. I don't think they'd work well as a joinable society, as being a feudal lord involves being involved in politics, and having the Grey Warden trait would be a requirement. The Blight as a disease could be a progressive trait, and perhaps a disease which could afflict counties. After a certain amount of time, it would progress until the character becomes a ghoul, and effectively dies. It could be acquired from special encounters with Darkspawn, fighting them, or if the county the character is in is afflicted. The Grey Warden trait could replace the Blighted trait, though it would be joining the religious order. The Grey Warden trait, it would give the character bonuses when fighting Darkspawn, both as an individual, but also when leading a unit. Perhaps every time it progresses, the character would be given a choice to answer the calling and retire the character, or continue playing, gaining the next level of the trait. Probably the first few, it'd just be progressively better bonuses against the Darkspawn, but later it'd start being accompanied by deteriorating health. The Grey Wardens as a society could potentially be paid for removing county-level effects like marauding Darkspawn. However, I think the requirement for joining the society should be the Grey Warden trait, which would preclude one from rulership. There could be a chance of the Grey Wardens taking part in local revolts, also with the option to banish them from your realm. If not banished, there would be the option to recruit a Warden Commander, not the position within the Grey Wardens, just a commander with a Grey Warden trait, during blights. I'm not sure if there's a way to make it so that the commander disappears after the blight ends. Another way is to have an intrigue option to spawn an army led by a Grey Warden commander, or perhaps every independent realm which hasn't banished the Grey Wardens can contract a realm-specific Holy Order army in the case of a blight. For the blight county-afflicting disease, there could be various options for how to handle it. There could be the option of doing away with the afflicted to end it, and with the increased risk of revolt. If the Reaper's Dew is active, it would definitely depopulate the county. At the point of the first blight, Ravane exists, though Orlais didn't get it, though the Sirene, who would become them, were involved in fighting the Darkspawn. Perhaps there could be a pandemic after the first blight to represent the famine, then the spawning of event troops in southern Thedas to represent Andraste's revolt. This would definitely be another starting point, both Andraste and Shartan being potential leaders of the revolt. From what I've read, it's questionable whether this actually founded the Andrastian faith, but it could represent the nascent faith. I'm not sure if there's a way to have the revolt ending after conquering a certain part of the empire, or introduce a new faith. The Elven revolt could be a separate event or part of the same one. I remember during one crusade in the unmodded game, I was given the option to vassalize a duchy which I had wholly taken over in the course of a crusade, before the Holy War was actually over. Perhaps this mechanic can allow for the revolt to succeed in breaking up the Imperium, while still losing according to the game's mechanics, i.e. leader captured. The government of the revolting states could be set up as a gavelkind, thus setting it up to fracture into numerous smaller states afterwards. Otherwise, perhaps the majority of the Tivinter Imperium could be set up as tributary states, which take advantage of the Imperium's weakness and assert their independence. The Dales would, I think, have their own culture, possibly called Dalish, though if the nomadic elves later have the same culture, that could be confusing, so perhaps calling it something else like Dotavaran culture might be good too. The religion could be a sort of reformed elven pantheon, though without any ability to petition their deities. The establishment of this realm could be accompanied by flavor text about the long walk starting. For unique improvements, I'm thinking something that would provide them with the Emerald Knights, possibly additional light cavalry. Their special troops would also be mages. The Emerald Knights could also be a society which character could join, with being Dalish and possibly worshipping the Evanuris being a prerequisite. This is also around when the First Inquisition originated. This could take the form of a series of holy wars waged by Andrastian realms, perhaps against the Free Marches, Antiva, Ravane, and the Almari tribes. There could be flavor text about their foundation and their becoming the Seekers of Truth. The Inquisition also developed the Right of Tranquility. This could be a trait which replaces Mage and any Mage specializations, probably adjusting some attributes as well. There is a ritual to reverse the Right of Tranquility, though the setting neither details this ritual nor what effect it would have on a person, particularly if they've been tranquil for a long time. I don't know if the First Inquisition would be akin to a religious order or society in the game, given Ameridan's worship of both the Evanuris and Andraste along with his lover. It seems more like just a military or political post. This Inquisition could be a society which one could join, though I'm not sure how its dissolution or transformation into the Seekers of Truth could be handled. I read that there was some suggestion that it was originally called the Seekers of Truth and the Inquisition was intended as a pejorative, so they could just be the Seekers of Truth. The Order of Fiery Promise could also be a society, though with darker goals. That could perhaps be combined with the creation of Orlais as a unified state under Cordelius Dracon and the founding of the Chantry. Orlais could have Chevalier-related improvements, giving them bonuses to heavy cavalry and numbers. The Chevaliers could be a joinable society. There doesn't appear to be a founding date. The next starting point could be the Second Blight. I'm thinking it would be just before the Blight actually starts, giving anyone choosing to play as the ruler of the Elves and the Dales the choice of whether to honor the allegiance or not. This one I don't think would need to start with the Darkspawn attacking the Dwarves, as at this point the Darkspawn largely control the deep roads, and the Blight would represent a reduction in the conflict between the Dwarves and the Darkspawn. The Dwarves at this point, I think, have a different culture, perhaps Orzammar and Kalsharok cultures, and the philosophy of the stone would be in place, at least in Orzammar, though I don't know what the alternative would be for Kalsharok. Lyrium explosives would exist. If the Dwarves have alchemist grenadiers, there could be improvements which add to their numbers and efficacy. Also, just as flavor, Dwarven archers would use crossbows. As a stereotypical Dwarvish thing, they'd also have a lot of heavy infantry. I'm not sure there's a way of incorporating Brontos. The Legion of the Dead doesn't have a founding date so far as I know. It may already be in existence at this point. Establishing it as a religious order would make sense, though it would likely only be open to dwarves, possibly only Orzammar dwarves, and would preclude rulership. There could be Orzammar-specific improvements available related to the Legion, along with the possibility of spawning armies for use against the Darkspawn. Neither the Carta nor the Dwarven Merchants Guild have foundation dates. They might not work terribly well as societies, but they could work as intrigue options or flavor text in events. You might have the option to borrow from them, or option to use them to acquire various things or various benefits. Andrastianism might at this point be limited to Orlais. The election of the Divine could be handled similarly to the election of a Pope in the main game. Their contribution to the war effort is supposed to be great, so perhaps they could have a large event-spawned army. I think Northern Thedas was still worshipping the old gods at this point, and the tribes in what would become Ferelden might still have some form of spirit worship. At the end of the Second Blight, Orlais apparently controlled a lot more territory and converted to Andrastianism, though much of it broke off afterwards. Perhaps Orlais could have Gavelkin's succession at this time. This is also when the circles were established. These could be an improvement tied to the religion of Andrastianism, giving bonuses to technology spread, levy reinforcement, and damage. This would, I think, restrict the use of mages everywhere. Andrastians couldn't have mages as special troops, but court mages could still exist. In Ferelden and Orlais, you might have it if you're at least a monarch. Other cultures like Anders and Rivain might allow it at the lower levels, and in Rivain it might be called a court seer. And in Navarra it could be a court mortalitazi. The Templars would also exist at this point. They could be a religious order, though they don't do much in the setting beyond dealing with mages, so they might not feature beyond possibly being a specialization for warriors, and in flavor text for dealing with magical events in provinces. The Exalted March on the Dales could be the next starting point, though it would be not much different from the start of the Second Blight. A successful march on the Dales would allow the building of alienages, though I'm not sure if that could be linked to the event or what effect it would have. I don't think that creating the Dalish as in-game nomads would work, as they don't operate that way in the setting. They could instead be random events, like randomly having the Dalish visit provinces. You could invite them in, pay them to go elsewhere, or drive them off militarily. Inviting them in could have economic effects, randomly good from trade or bad from conflict with the citizens, increased revolt risk from citizens disliking their presence, or maybe revolts in the alienages, perhaps enabling Dalish-specific events and intrigues, or do nothing at all. Paying for them to leave would cost money, while perhaps upsetting the locals. Military action could lead to the province being occupied by hostile Dalish raiders, economic damage to the province, or nothing at all. Alienages could be represented by random events for certain cultures. By the Third Blight, the Antiban Crows exist. They could be available for intrigue options, but given their recruitment practices, they probably couldn't be a joinable society. The third blight could be another starting point, as could the Navaran and Marcher revolts against Tevinter and Orlais afterwards. Navara would definitely exist at this point, and I'm thinking that there could be some culturally linked improvements for them and maybe great works called the Necropolis, or Talatazi as a specialization would be available at this point, at least to Navaran mages. The next point of interest would be the establishment of the Imperial Chantry and the subsequent exalted marches against it. I'm not sure if its establishment itself could be made interesting to play, but the exalted marches would be. Under Tevinter Andrastianism, a lot of things would be different. The opinion of mages, for one. The circle might instead allow for fielding mages as troops, and court mages might be allowed for everyone, or redundant if functionally all rulers are mages. The circles could also be a joinable society, though joining the magisterium might be preferable. The fourth blight would not be much different from the others aside from seeing the extinction of the griffins. As mentioned earlier, this could be tied to an old Anders culture. Also, at this time, Ferelden is being united under King Calenhad Therin. Fereldens might have Mabari Wardog trainers as a unique improvement for additional or bonuses to light infantry. Ferelden apparently had early problems with werewolves from the Brazilian forest, which they eventually solved with an extermination war. Perhaps the werewolves could be a minor theocracy. At this point, I think the Avar and the Chazin to the far south would start becoming distinct from the Almari turned Fereldens. There could be special mechanics for Avar mages, as their training is accomplished by being possessed, though this might not be necessary, as my impression is that their mages mostly only take advisory roles and might only rule temple holdings. After that comes the Qunari Invasion. Events spawn a bunch of troops with Qunari culture and the Qun as a religion and set them at war with Tevinter, with Parvolan as the prize. I'm not sure what special improvements they'd be able to build, perhaps Avarad, training facilities to field mages, and rename a bunch of the other buildings with corresponding Qunari troop types. There's also the question of Qunari gunpowder. Perhaps that could be a special commander trait or a special unit. The exalted marches against the Qunari could be another starting point. Then the Qunari would have control of Parvolan, Rivain, Antiva, Saharan, and much of Tevinter. They would probably have at least partially succeeded in converting those counties. The next would be the Orlesian invasion of Ferelden and the subsequent rebellion. In Saharan, it could be a fight between Tevinter, the Qunari, Saharan rebels, and the Fog Warriors. Then there's the fifth blight, which I think would start with the Ferelden Civil War already started. I don't think that the Darkspawn Civil War would be anything more than an interesting bit of flavor text. The Mage Rebellion is a significant event in the setting's history, though I don't know how you would incorporate that. Perhaps it could be two sets of spawned rebels, or just roll in Griffith's attack on Thedas. The Malaysian Civil War would be occurring at the same time as a fighting for Duke Gaspard's claim to the throne. I think there's a little more established in the setting, like the Qunari Antam attacking King Tevinter, but the next big thing sounds like the actions against the awakened Solas. I will include a summary in the description. It will probably be long. And again, if you develop such a mod, please tell me. If you want to credit me in the description, that'd be great, but I'd see most of this as being your work, because I see this coding this, or however mods are created in Crusader Kings, as being the lion's share of the work. This is more or less just the ideas, but again, if you develop this, please let me know so I can play it. That's the end of the video. Thank you for watching. Please do any relevant things with the buttons, and have a nice day.